Good morning. It's a mild day in the city of Chennai, earlier known as Madras. I'm here at a fairly green place. A bunch of children playing cricket, India's famous team sport. These are very young kids. And if I had to ask any one of them what they thought of Mukesh Ambani and Reliance Industries, they would say, well, a whole lot of good things. These are children who are about 12, 13 years old. Hi, thanks for watching this. I have a couple of things to say about Reliance and Mukesh Ambani in response to the Economist, which said many things about Reliance and about Mukesh being an unloved billionaire, Mukesh Ambani being an unloved billionaire. The next issue of The Economist would be with us electronically on Friday, and the print edition will be here with us on Saturday, the 9th of August. I'm not too sure who else has a point of view in favor of Reliance and Mukesh, but I thought I should express mine. I'm Ramachandran, Gopalan Ramachandran, or G. Ramachandran, or merely Ramach. And Reliance Industries in India has been around for about 50 years. Not yet 50 years, and in a couple of years, Reliance would be 50 years old, celebrating 50 glorious years. The story that The Economist has on Reliance and on Mukesh Ambani has a bit of criticism. It's a mix of facts, some prejudices, some statements that relate to how Reliance conducts its businesses. At the same time, it has a bit of praise too. It says that Reliance has a credit rating which is above government's. That's pretty good. It's a cash-rich company. It's very Indian, and it pays its taxes. It hasn't left any creditors disappointed. It pays its debt on time, and it exports a whole lot. It employs many, many people. It straddles the Indian economy, and it also owns the very famous team, the Mumbai Indians. But let me get to the story here. In the main, The Economist thinks that Reliance should be reforming for their own good and for the nation's good, which is right. I think we have to look at reform in a way that a firm or a person can get better and better. And if you do recall, Reliance used to say growth is life. In that context, growth in any manner, growth qualitatively, growth quantitatively in terms of revenues and profits, would really mean life to Mukesh Ambani, the board that runs Reliance Industries Limited and all their employees. But what really is the complaint? To start with, it's about cronyism. And it kind of conveniently says that Dhirubhai Ambani, the late Dhirubhai Ambani, about whom I wrote upon his death, in the Hindu business line, a story which goes like this: what the teacher's son has taught us. Okay, but the story is this, that Dhirubhai Ambani was a crony and he knew how to work around the bureaucracy and the political apparatus in India. Such a statement actually says a whole lot more, not very sweet, about the Indian bureaucracy and the political environment, in the sense that India knew it had to grow, but it had an old set of rules, prejudices, which really made it very difficult, if not impossible, for firms to grow. It had a set of acts which were subsequently amended. But much before that, Dhirubhai Ambani thought that enterprise was India's way of life, and that it was required on the part of bureaucracy and the political apparatus to at least allow him to play the role of an entrepreneur. And Dhirubhai Ambani would have done much better had he not been a crony, but that's to say a whole lot, in the sense that the Indian political environment and the bureaucracy should have acted with a bigger agenda. Reliance would be about 50 years old in 2016 or 2017. That's not very far away. And of course, the legendary founder, Dhirubhai Ambani, had to work across a very stubborn, anti-people bureaucracy, stubbornly anti-people bureaucracy, and India's laws at that time were wholly prejudiced against enterprise against firms. The very structure of the Indian bureaucracy, the laws that were related to the economy were very backward. At the same time, India had a mass market for a whole lot of things. And Dhirubhai Ambani thought that some of these things had to be tweaked because Parliament wasn't ready to change those things, which they did much later. But the change came later, but the seeds of change were sown by Dhirubhai Ambani. So we got to compliment Dhirubhai Ambani for actually being a foresighted pioneer, looking at scale as a very important attribute to running a business in India. You know, we have a population which is very large, and scale, of course, is something that you need to keep costs low. So cronyism is something that we need to be very careful about when we charge this or use this as a whip to attack the Ambanis or Reliance Industries. To a large extent, cronyism happens whenever the political apparatus and the bureaucracy aren't even-minded. They should be fair-minded, imaginative. They should look beyond their noses in order for people within their economies to grow. So Dhirubhai Ambani was the seed that made these changes happen later. Second part, of course, is about the board of directors at Reliance Industries Limited and the ownership, of course. We got to talk a bit about agency costs. Remember Jensen and Meckling, Michael Jensen and William Meckling. We understand that closely held companies actually create the right rewards and penalties for misgovernance or mismanagement. Reliance Industries Limited is to a large extent held by the Ambanis, and that's very good. That's extremely good because that's the creative force that propels them to keep growing, and they will reform for sure. The other part is the penalties would also be large. Any extravagant excursion into new businesses that are ill-founded or merely assumed to be large would translate into big penalties. The creative force and the protective core are both constituted by the closely held ownership structure, which will keep agency costs low. And I think it's a fairly important thing because Reliance Industries Limited works in multiple businesses but under one company, so it's very easy to get swayed into adventures. More importantly, Reliance Industries is a cash-rich company. They keep investing monies here. Let's look at it this way. They could have been founded by cronyism in an era where policies necessitated such thinking or actions, but now it's a fair open field. And what Reliance does, unlike many multinationals, is this. It earns its cash here and reinvests it in India. It's a very good thing. And this is really why Reliance is extremely important to the Indian economy. And as India grows, their firm would keep growing, and the reform will come because they have to compete. The inside ownership is its legitimate source of creativity and its own protective device. So we really look at ownership and the constitution of the board of directors to be in favor of Reliance's future, its ability to reform as quickly as it can without really delaying it. The third part relates to Reliance and its global sophistication. The Economist says that the employees of Reliance didn't have the correct amount of sophistication. They weren't really suave to match those, let's say, at Chevron and ExxonMobil. Fine. The Economist goes on to say that Reliance is a nickel and dime company. How untrue, but how unfair as well. Even if the nickel and dime statement or description were to be true, let's look at it. It's very useful to be called a nickel and dime company because every penny matters to a company that's closely held. Consider what happened at Hewlett Packard. HP, the great HP, went ahead and acquired Autonomy, a software company based in Britain, and it paid about $9.8 billion, let's say 10-9, and later found that it had paid a whole lot more. That's an extravagant excursion that HP went into, and HP isn't closely held. So closely held companies have a certain way of looking at the attributes of potential takeover targets. Whether they're friendly or unfriendly is not the question, but they need to look at protecting shareholders' wealth. HP did. So widely held companies can do some things egregious and then get away, pay some penalties and go away. But Reliance, a closely held company, is unlikely to do any of these things. It's their own money, the Ambani's money, so they'll be doubly careful. And they may lack the so-called refinement of CEOs and CFOs who merely are paid employees, but the point is they take care of corporate wealth a whole lot more than professional CEOs and CFOs who may not have big stakes within the company. And it's closely held. So let's look at what Dhirubhai did. His company's stock is owned by a whole lot of people, but what they've done also along the way is kept reinvesting their personal cash flows by buying more stock. So this is very good. Effectively, there's been a congruence of personal motives and firms' motives where they kept reinvesting their own cash. And if you go back to orthodox finance, remember the seminal article by Michael Jensen and William Meckling? They're talking about the theory of the firm and agency costs. What Dhirubhai had taught his sons and family was to keep reinvesting their cash by buying more stock so as to enhance insider ownership at Reliance, thereby cutting agency costs, something which is very good, very desirable. That's what Michael Dell did when he took his company private. And when you have an insider ownership which is very high, companies have a greater flexibility to be very creative and, of course, to dissuade them from getting into extravagant adventures and excursions. There are many things to talk about in favor of closely held companies, and Reliance practices it. And talking about its board, why would you need a very active board when the insider owner is going to do all the legitimate things to enhance the firm's wealth? So long as the firm is law-abiding, pays its taxes, repays its creditors, the principal and the interest, and does a good job in the product market, keeps its employees happy, the board and the principal owners do the same thing. There's congruence. You need more of independent directors when firms are loosely held and you have a very small inside ownership. Then, of course, the shareholding has to really be very watchful and vigilant. This obsession with the independent director is so wholly America-driven because not many firms are entirely owned by the insiders, okay? And when you talk about the insider ownership at Reliance, and which the Economist is very uncomfortable with, let's talk a bit about Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. Do you know that they have turbocharged voting rights? That company doesn't follow one share, one vote. They have turbocharged voting power in the hands of Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and I haven't seen many negative things being written about Google. And incidentally, Class C shareholders of Google, the employees, have no vote at all. By contrast, Reliance says that's fine, one share, one vote, but we have put in our own money and own all the stock. Let's talk about Facebook too. Mark Zuckerberg has an immense amount of voting power, but doesn't have all of the stocks. It's disproportionately high compared with his own investment. Mark Zuckerberg's voting rights probably are at about 53%. And if we accept Facebook and Google the way they are, I don't think there's anything extremely wrong at all about what Reliance does. It's actually favorable to have a greater insider stock so that all those excesses which firms get to indulge in because they can push all the losses to the outside shareholders, those excesses aren't going to be happening at Reliance. So I think we have to really be very careful when we cast aspersions about the constitution of the board and the tightly held insider structure, ownership structure at Reliance. About the unloved billionaire part, I don't think there's been a vote, really, not that a vote matters. Mukesh Ambani is not a film actor where one has to kind of contest. He's not a cricketer. He's a down-to-earth, manager, owner of the firm, doing things that are good to his wealth invested in the company and those of his other shareholders, including the big institutional shareholders. He does things which are good to the debt holders, to shareholders, good for the employees, good for customers.